Hi everybody, and welcome to Killer Cans Gaming. And today we are going to be doing something a little bit unusual. It's a stream that I've been meaning to do for quite a while now. Today I'm going to try and do as complete a tutorial as I can on how to mod Transport Fever. And we'll be posting this to YouTube later on with various links to the things that we are using. So what we're going to try and do today is show you exactly how we go from our 3D modeling software, such as this one, this is in 3D Studio Max, to the Transport Fever model viewer, which we are using right here. So the first thing you want to do obviously is model and texture your locomotive or wagon or whatever it is you're making at the moment. This one currently has 2 textures on it. Well, actually 3. You got one texture for the main body, we got another texture for the tender, and we also have a texture for the interior. The reason why we are splitting these textures up is because the tender and the interior will need to be seen through the windows, which is literally going to be a alpha channel on the texture. So we can see on here, these windows are literally just drawn in the alpha channel, and in order to actually see the interior and the tender through the windows, we need them to be a separate texture, and we'll explain why that is later on. So once you've actually got your model completed, you need to start exporting it. Now, before you export, you want to make sure that it's the correct scale. In 3D Studio Max, it's roughly this size compared to the background grid. You also want it to be facing to the right in the top view, or along X positive. So I believe X positive is up that way. Yeah, it is. You can see it down there. So as far as dimensions are concerned, X positive is forward, Y positive is on the left. So once you have scaled and oriented your model, it's time to export it. Now the things that we need to export are obviously the main body, and things that need to be able to move and animate needs to be separated. So for example, as the train is going around a corner, the tender will need to be able to rotate a bit just to help for the curve, and obviously the wheels will need to go with the tender as well. So that's a separate object, that's a separate object. Also, because that is using a different texture to the rest of it, that's also an object on its own. And of course then we have the crankshaft, well, the connecting rod and the wheels are also going to be separate objects. But because these 2 wheels are literally a clone of each other, we only have to export one of them, and we can use the exported wheel twice and just move it over to fill up with that one. And it's the same thing for these ones. These 2 wheels are literally clones of each other, so we only need to export one of those. The tender wheels are also different to these 2, but again, these 3 are clones of each other, so all we need to do down here is export one drive wheel, one forward truck wheel, and one tender wheel, and then we can use them multiple times later on and move them about just to position them on the locomotive. And also we'll be exporting one of these connecting rods, which we can also use on the other side, just sort of repositioned. So what we want to do is literally export the main body as it is. So you literally just go up here, export selected. Now the model converter that I'm using converts from OBJ format, so we'll be exporting it as an OBJ and then going from there. Now the things that we want to link to the body that need to move independently, what we need to do with them is reposition them slightly. So for the turret, for the tender, for example, Once we got the pivot point where we want it, which is right there. Once we got the pivot point where we want it to be, we would then need to very quickly change this to 0 and this to, oh no, that's wrong. So with the movement tool selected, we want to change that to 0 and that to 0. So the tender is literally positioned on 0, 0, 0. As we can see, that pivot point is now on absolute center of the world, and we'll export it from there. And we want to do exactly the same thing with the wheels. So we take the wheel that we're going to use and move that to absolute 0, and that's where we'd export it from. And we'll do exactly the same thing with the connecting rods, the other wheels, and the forward truck that needs to rotate as well. So let's put those back. There we go. Right, so once they are exported, we'll have a nice number of meshes ready to be converted. So let's do that real quick then. We want to export this. Export selected. We shall put that F2P so mesh export. Like I said, we'll be doing it in OBJ format, so this will be 2P body. Then we want to do the interior exactly where that is as well, so export selected, 2P int. Right, now like I said, we want to grab the tender and put it at absolute 0, like so, and then export selected, 2P. I'm going to export this one as tender 2 because my 2P actually has 2 different tenders. This one's the Midland model, which was named as tender 1. Or tender 2 actually, sorry, yeah, tender 2. And the LMS tender was tender 1. I got them the wrong way around, but never mind. Right, and then we'll grab our wheel and we'll export that as well at absolute 0. So that one is 2P drive wheel. And then we'll grab one of these, and that one's to go at absolute 0 as well. Also remember, of course, that the pivot point on the wheels is also, of course, in the middle, so that when they spin later on, they turn as they should. There we go. So we'll export that one again as truck wheel. And we'll just get the tender wheel as well, so we'll again put that at absolute 0. There we go. So for people who are just joining us in Twitch chat, we are doing a tutorial stream today. This is something I've been meaning to do for a while. We are going to do as complete a tutorial as we can to get your model from your modeling software of choice into Transport Fever. I am currently using 3D Studio Max, but you can use whichever others you want. You could use Blender, you could use Maya, whatever you want really. The model converter that we are using at the moment converts from OBJ format, which is a very widespread format. Pretty much everything can export to that these days. But there are other converters out there which can work from FBX if that's your preferred format. So yeah, it's basically up to you. So what we've just done is we've exported the bits that we need from 3D Studio Max into OBJ format, and we'll take it from there. So if we just have a look at the folder that we just exported them to, they are... Where did I put them? Pretty sure I put them in here somewhere. Mesh exports, there we go. So these are the meshes that we just exported. So what we want to do with them is convert them. So the converter that I'm using, let's just go find it. For a moment while I have a quick navigate to it. Right, so the converter that I'm using is just a very, very simple converter that we got from transportfever.net. It's this one. It's BR146's converter. It's just a very basic converter. I'll put the link into the chat now, and if you're looking later on YouTube, I'll have this in the description. But that's where we're getting this converter from. And like I said, it's a very, very basic converter. When you've unzipped it, it's basically right here. If you right click on run and open it with Notepad, that's literally all that's in it. And what we want to do on here is match all this lot up to our meshes that we've just exported here. So what we want to do is we just copy this lot, put it into the same folder as the converter, like so. And then we want one of these for each of the different objects that we've got up here. So we've already got one for 10:2. We want one for the Bondi. Helps if you spell it right. There we go. We want another one for the drive wheel. Etc, etc. I don't really need to do all of these right now since I've already exported all of them, but this is just to show what's going on here. So we want another one for, let's say, tender wheel. That should do for now. So once you've got all of those in there, you just want to save that, and then you just literally run it, and basically it looks like that. And then when it's done, as you can see, we've got some mesh and mesh blob files that have appeared down here, and these are the model files that Transport Fever uses. So the mesh.blob is the actual mesh file, and the .mesh file can be opened in Notepad, and this just has a bit of Lua code to configure the actual mesh. And we want to open the mesh files and everything first, just to change this little bit down here to our material. And I'll show you why we want to change that bit in just a moment. So now that we've converted all of these to the 3D files that the game uses, we can put these aside for the time being. But the next thing that we want to do is set up the folder structure for the mod. So in Transport Fever's install folder, you've got the mods folder, and then in there, that's where you directly install various mods that you want to use. And this is where we assemble our own mod as well. So you start, you create a new folder, name it whatever you want, but at the end you have _1, and this is how you indicate the version of the mod to the game. So you need to have an _-1 just for the initial version. And then inside there you have a res file, res folder, and then in the res, the ones that we want to make to start off with is models and textures. So inside the models folder, you've got group, material, mesh, and model. And because we are making a locomotive, inside each of these folders we have vehicle and train, and that's where we have those files. So if we have a look at the mesh again, you've again got vehicle train. If you have a look in the material, again it's vehicle train. And up at group, it's also again vehicle train in there as well. So the first one we want to go to is in the model, vehicle train, and you have these files, the MDL files. This literally defines everything about your mods. This is probably the most important file. Without these, you don't have a mod. So if we open one of these first, again this is just a Lua script, so you can open it in Notepad++. This is the one that I tend to use. But you can open it in any text editor, so you can open it in Notepad if you wanted to, you can open it in WordPad, whatever you want, just anything that can edit text. So this is our MDL file, and you have the bounding box right here. That defines how big the locomotive is, so you get details of the bounding box from 3D Studio Max. What we want to do is grab a little helper here and move it to the front. So right about there, I'd say, is where we want it to contact other things like wagons and what have you. Just right at the front of the right at the front of the buffer. And we literally take the XY, well, we literally take the X from down here, which is 4.869, and we put that in here. As you can see, the number was slightly different last time I did it. But that is our front number. And then again, to get the back, you simply move that to the back buffer, and then you've got your negative number down there, which is never, well, that one's negative 11.06. But when I did this last time, that was the number I went with. And that's how you set up the bounding box, and that's all you need to do with that, really. Just the length on either side, so that when it attaches to other wagons, either at the front or the back, that is where that's where they meet. So next up down here, you have your meshes. So down here is the list of all the meshes that make up the actual model. You can either do groups or meshes in here. If you change this to, for example, mesh, then it will look for this file in the mesh folder. If we just go back up here. So as I was saying earlier on, we've got the mesh and we've got the group folder, and then inside these we've got vehicle train, and there's a list of all of our meshes. And then again in group we've also got vehicle train, and there's all of our groups. So you can just list them as a mesh, and it will look for that. It will look for the mesh in there. Ooh, that was from Gav T. Thank you very much for the cheer. So where was I? Yes, the mesh and the group. So if we had a mesh in there, that was how we'd list that. But at the moment, we are grouping everything up. So if we turn that back to group, and that is a group as well. And then underneath here, this is the position in the world that we want this group to spawn. And at the moment, these are the XYZ coordinates. And as you can see, they are absolute 0. We don't need them to be offset by any number. So that'll just spawn in the middle as it is. As you can see down here, our tender group is a little bit different, because earlier on, we exported the tender to be at absolute 0. So in order to position it so that it can rotate properly when we want it to, there we go. Yeah, when we exported it, it was down at absolute 0. So when we want to position it in the world, we simply take the XYZ coordinates from down here and put them in here. As you can see, they match. And then again, we have one last group, which is the forward truck down here with the 2 front wheels. And again, because we exported the truck at absolute 0, again, we just taken the X and Z coordinates from down here and put them in there. So that when you open them up in Model Viewer, as you can see, the tender is where it's supposed to be, and the forward truck is also where it's supposed to be. If, for example, our tender was at absolute 0, and we saved that, then if we go into Model Viewer, and it helps if I had the right one opened. There you go. If you go look in Model Viewer now, the tender is at absolute 0. But if we put that back to where it was and save again, then that pings back to where it's supposed to be. So, I was talking about these groups. The reason why we have the group files is because we have numerous meshes grouped together, which allows us to put fewer things in the actual model file, which keeps things a bit more tidier, keeps things a bit easier to see where things are. But also, of course, group files allows you to use hierarchies in your model. So, for example, on the tender, for example, our tender wheels are linked in a hierarchy to the tender itself. At least they should be, but they're currently linked to the wrong one. There you go. So if they are linked to the tender like that, when we rotate our tender, the wheels will rotate with it. And we do literally exactly the same thing using group files. So if we have a look in our group folder, you can see there's a number of different groups in here. We've got the body group, and we've got the tender group. And as you can see, this is literally exactly the same bit of code that we saw just now in the MDL file. Right here, you've got the LODs, you've got the children, you've got your events down here as well. And that's exactly the same thing that we've got in our group. So for the main body group, we've got the body mesh that we exported earlier on. We've got 2 drive wheels. And again, these are exactly the same drive wheel meshes, but we've just called upon them twice and positioned them where they need to be. And then we've got our 2 link rods that we exported, these things. And again, they're just positioned where we want them to be. And then we have our internal mesh, which is the cab internal, which we also exported earlier on. And they're just positioned up in a group. And then that group in the model file is the one at the top here. And again, we also have the tender group. So we've got the tender mesh right there. And the 3 tender wheels underneath it. And that's grouped up, and then in the model file we have that there. And then it's exactly the same again for the truck, because the forward truck at the front here also needs to rotate independently as the train's going around corners. So again, we're using a group on that for the hierarchy. So moving on, now that we've got all of our groups together, the next bit is the events. So Events are what trigger animations on your model. You could have an event that's always triggered. So you have an animation somewhere on your model that is always going around, like a ventilation fan, for example, is always spinning. But on this one, we have the drive event, which is triggering the drive animation. And basically what this is doing is when the drive event is triggered, it sends the trigger to group 1, which is the first item listed in the children, which is our body group. And it's played forward, and you've got the name. And then when that event gets sent to the body group, if we have a look at that again, we can see that down here we've got another bit of code that is listening for an event, and the event that it hears is drive, so it sends a drive trigger to objects 4 and 5, which up here in the list is link rod 1, well, link rod left and link rod right, which is these two rods here. Now, if we have a look in the meshes that we exported earlier on, you can see we've got link rod left and right down here in .mesh. If we open one of the .meshes in Notepad, there is a little bit of code at the top here that is listening for the drive animation being sent to it, which we saw just now in the group. Yep, so drive is being sent to object 4, which is link rod left. And then when the link rod hears that, it triggers this animation. Now this animation is a generated animation. There is an awesome tutorial on Steam that shows you how to set these ones up, and it's right here. So I highly recommend that you check that one out. I'll just put the link into the chat, and if you're watching on YouTube later on, that will also be in the description. This literally tells you how to set up your connecting rod and piston rods, etc., for the game to automatically generate an animation. Now, because our 2P only has the exterior connecting rod, we only have the bit of code in here for the green rod across here, which is a coupling rod right there, which is this bit of code. So as you can see, that is present in our link rod mesh file right at the top there, and we've got the appropriate coordinates typed in here. So the result of that is when we select drive and click the play button, that happens in Model Viewer. And because the game is automatically generating this, it will automatically sync up with the rotation of the wheels when the locomotive drives forward. So like I said, this one is automatically generated by the game. There is an alternative where you can manually dial in the keyframe data. If we have a look at my standard class 7, better known as the Britannia, let's open one of these mesh files. Is this the correct one to look at? There we go. So this is one of the animated rods for my standard class 7. I manually keyframed the animation data into this, and this allowed me to do a far more complicated animation than you get with the standard game generated animation. So if we have a look at my standard 7 in Model Viewer, The drive rod animation is far more complicated than just the standard basic stuff, and manually keyframing it all in, that was the end result. So like I said, you can manually do it, or if your drive rod animation is much more simple, then you can actually use the game's own animation generator, which is with this code right here. So like I said, check out that guide, very, very good. And that tells you exactly how to do that. So yeah, if we go back to my 2P again, instead of all this complicated stuff here, the 2P just has the one coupling rod on the outside. So far better suited to the simple generated animation, which is what I used on there. And then down here, which is, as I said earlier on, right after we exported and converted to the mesh and mesh blob, we want to change this bit here to the material that it is using. So the material is in, if we go back to it, res, models, material, vehicle train. Now these are all the materials that we have applied to our meshes. I've got several of them here because I've got them in different liveries. But the one that we've got open at the moment, the Midland Railways livery, that just has, well, it just uses 3 materials. You got one for the tender, you got one for the body, and you got the one for the interior. And the interior is shared across all the different liveries, so that one isn't multiplied. So if we have a look at the materials in Model Viewer, let's take a look at the body material, for example. What we have is our albedo texture. That's the main livery texture. Now these can be TGA or DDS, depending on whichever one you prefer to use. At the moment I'm using TGAs. So the first thing we have is the main texture file. And then down here we've got our color dirt rust map. I call this the CDR for short. We'll take a look at how to make one of these in a moment. I'm also using the game's own dirt and rust textures, which is that one and these ones down here. And then here we've got the MGA. This is the metal gloss and AO, which is what defines our material. If you have a look at how shiny these things are, as you can see, the actual polished bit of the locomotive is a little bit more shiny than the front of the boiler here. And that is all done in the MGA file. And also, of course, we have our normal map. And what I mean by normal map is we've got some extra bit of detail on here which isn't actually modelled onto the locomotive. If we have a look at these little holes on the side of the boiler, if you look really, really closely, you can just about see that the mesh is actually flat along there. It's a flat face. But the little holes in the side of the boiler are a visual effect done by the normal map. It makes it look like there's little holes punched in there when there actually isn't. And you can also see this in action on our rivets on the front here. Again, these are pretty much flat faces, but the riveting detail is actually an effect done by the normal map. It looks like they're sort of protruding out from the front, whereas in reality they're not. It's a flat face with a normal map added. So pretty cool effect, really. And again, we're using exactly the same method to make it look like there's rivets on the tender. And that's all done in the normal map. So, every single mesh needs to have a material file. And like I said, these material files are pointing to textures that we have in our textures folders subtree. So if we have a look at our folders again, If you have a look in res, we've got models, we've got textures, and again in the textures we've got models, vehicle, train, and this is where all of our textures are stored. As you can see, they are all TGAs at the moment. If we go back to the model again, the next thing that we are looking at, these visible from to and from down here, these are useful if you're setting up level of details or LODs. At the moment we've only got one LOD, which is visible up to 2000 meters. If you want to have a dynamic level of detail on your model, as in it gets more detailed the closer the camera gets to it, you set it up using visible from and visible tos down here under each LOD level. So for example, you could have a really low detailed mesh from 2000 meters to 1000 meters away, then it gets gradually more detailed as you get closer to the loco, and that's where it's all set up from right there. So metadata, you've got the name of the model. This is the name that it shows in the depot when you're buying the locomotive, and then right underneath that you've got your description. These little backward slash ends is the code for a line break. So as you can see, we've got a couple more line breaks in there. That's just literally in there for formatting. And then you have down here the top speed, the weight, power, tractive effort, and type. These are set up in metric. So that isn't actually 80 miles an hour, that's 80.4 kilometers an hour, I believe, and all the rest of the metric setups in there. Underneath it, you've got your axles. These need to be listed for each wheel that we've got on the locomotive. And this allows the game to make the wheels spin when the vehicle moves, and also, of course, triggers the clacks, clack, 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 as it's moving along on the rails. So you just list one of these for each one you've got. So we've got 2 truck wheels, we've got 2 drive wheels, and then we've got our 3 tender wheels listed right there. And you want to list it as the mesh, so it knows which mesh to look for. And then down here we've got the sound set. As you can see, I was a little bit cheeky on the 2P and used exactly the same sound set that I built for my Fowler 4F mod. It's literally exactly the same thing, I didn't change it at all, it's right there. So under transport vehicle, we have this bit telling the game that it is rail. You could also have things like road or whatever it is that aircraft and boats use. Something else I want to mention up here under type, we currently got steam. You can change that for diesel or electric. Alternatively, it could be wagons or passenger wagons for an unpowered vehicle. So yeah, down here under seats we've got our 2 crew members, because crew true, and again we've got our position data right here, and if we wanted to rotate them we use these numbers right here. If we have a look in our model, there's our 2 crewmen. Let's just reload the model again so that they're actually animated rather than doing the T-pose. So there's our 2 crew members just standing in the cab. And if we decided to, let's say, rotate one 90 degrees on the x-axis, there we go, one of our crewmen has been rotated 90 degrees on the x-axis. He's now looking to his left, so if we just put him back to facing forward, and again these numbers here position them on the X, Y and Z axis. If you're making a diesel or electric locomotive and the driver is generally sat in the cab, you would want to switch this standing to false. And once we've saved that, we should now see that he's now sat rather than standing. And you want to position him on his seat, again using the XYZ up here. So let's just switch him back to true because he is standing. And there we go. So the next bit is we have our availability. This is the years that you can buy the vehicle in the game. The Midland Rail version of my 2P is available from 1882 and carries on right through to the end of Steam in 1966. These years can be whatever you want. If you want your loco to last indefinitely, so let's say it unlocks in 1882 but just carries on forever, you simply switch that to a -1 and it will just go on forever. I believe an alternative is 0, but that doesn't really matter too much. The one that we are using is 1966 because that is when they stopped building these. So down here we've got the cost and the running costs. If you set them to -1, then the game will automatically calculate how much the locomotive costs based on things like its power, its speed, tractive effort, things like that. It throws all those calculations together and comes up with a balanced cost in the game. Alternatively, you can set this to whatever you want it to be, and that's how much it will cost. If you, for example, think that the game thinks it costs too much or costs too little, then you can set your own prices for it in there. And the lifespan, this is how many years the loco lasts before the game starts saying it needs to be replaced. So 50 years is 100% lifespan for the locomotive. And then down here, the last thing we got at the bottom of our MDL file, we got a couple of particle emitters. We use these for the steam and smoke coming out of the funnels. And my 2P also has a little bit of smoke coming out from the cylinders on the inside, as well as the main chimney. As you see, the first one, you got the position, you got the velocity, you got color. You can do all sorts of interesting effects just playing around with these numbers. But I found that these were pretty good numbers to go on with for our two bits of smoke coming out of the piston, and that's the one that comes out of the chimney. And that is a model file, fully explained. So we've had a look at the model files, we've had a look at the mesh files. Like I said, in the meshes, that's where we contain all the animations, but the thing that we need to be absolutely sure of in the mesh file is that the material is pointing to the right one. This one, for example, is using 2P body BR MTL, which is up here in the materials folder, and the materials point to the textures that we use. We've had a look at the group files, which allows us to group the various meshes together to basically allow us to hierarchy objects and basically keep things nice and tidy in our model file. So one other thing that we've got up here is we have our config, because we had a custom audio file. If we have a look down here, we've got the sound set file of 4F. We set that up by having a config sound set, and there's our 4F. Now I've literally just copied these over from my old 4F mod, but we've got our custom audio for the idling, we've got fast. We're currently using stock reels, winging and brakes audio effects in there, but we have our own custom whistle and our own custom chuffs. And all of these audio files are placed in audio, effects, vehicle, file of 4F, which was pointed to earlier on in the config file. So a lot of these things you can literally just copy directly from stock vehicles in the game. Most of the things, if you go to Transport Fever install directory, you'll find the res directory. And everything that we were looking at earlier is in here. There's the models folder, model, vehicle, train, and there's all the stock trains. And again, if we open one of these up in Model Viewer, you can see that a lot of the code here is looking exactly the same as what we saw earlier on. This particular one does indeed have a set of LODs, so you've got one set of LODs there, and then you've got another set from here, and then another set there, which is just literally groups. These ones are using meshes, but the last LOD here is using just 3 groups. And as you can see, they've got their visible to and visible from data right there. So this last LOD is visible from 150 meters to 0. This one is from 150 meters to 350 meters, and then this last one 350 meters up to almost 2 kilometers away. And you've got all of the metadata in there as well, which you can see where we sort of copied and pasted from earlier on. This one's an electric train. What are we using actually? It's AE7 4-7. So yeah, this is an electric loco that we're looking at here, and it's got its sound sets up here. The seats for the drivers. This one is using 2 drivers because of the recent patch that has allowed reversible vehicles. So we have one driver for when it's going forward, and one driver here for when it's going backwards. So he's sat in the reverse cab. And there's the bit of code there that allows it to be reversible. And like I said earlier on, we also have our availability bits, and the prices, lifespans are all in there. This particular vehicle doesn't have any particle emitters, but if it did, that bit of code would be down here as well. So yeah, pretty much every modder out there gets all this code from copying it from these stock locomotives, and you can find them all in here. And again, if we have a look at group, and we've got our group files up here as well, so vehicle, train, and again all the code you can just copy out of there and change it to suit your own vehicle. So if we go back to our mod again, where is it? The 2P, there it is. Right, so we've had a look at all of our code files. Fairly straightforward to set all these up. We know how they all work. So let's have a look at our textures. Now, I was saying earlier on that we had our basic body textures, and then we've got things like our MGAs and the CDRs. Now these, if we open up Paint Shop, we can have a look at them. Here we go. So our body, if you have a look at the body texture for our Midlands Railway 2P, so this is just for the front body bit. The main texture looks like this, so pretty much what you expect from a main texture really. However, the MGA that we use for it is this one, and that is our metal gloss AO texture, and if we open that, it looks very, very different to our main texture. It looks like a horrendous mismatch of different colours, and the reason for that is that the game is actually using the red, green and blue channels of the texture for different reasons. So if we split this texture up into its RGBs, we have our red, green and blue channels. So the red channel is how metallic we want a surface to appear, and the brighter white, the more metallic it will be. And if we have a look at these bits here, these are the windows that we got on the locomotive, which aren't metallic at all. So they are actually a very, very dark, almost black colour. Whereas down here we've got the buffer bits at the front, which we wanted to look nice and shiny and metallic. You can see they are nice and shiny indeed, so they are a very, very bright white colour. Now over in the green channel, this is our gloss. So these are the bits of the locomotive that we want to appear really, really glossy. So the windows are a very bright white colour. and that allows it to look very, very reflective when we have a look closely at the glass. As you can see, it is reflecting the background a little bit, and that's how we do reflections on glass. We make them very, very glossy. And what you can also see on here is you've got some areas that are again a lighter shade than others. If we have a look on our main body, that's because these are the polished areas of the locomotive, and then you've got the not so polished areas, such as down around the drivetrain, the front truck, the boiler. So as you can see, they are slightly less glossy than the polished areas, and that's what gives us the effect that we saw earlier on. As you can see, the polished bit of the boiler is far more shiny than this bit at the front. And again, parts of the wheels are more shiny than the black bits down there. And that's how we do it. It's on the green channel of the MGA. That gives us our gloss. That gives us our metal effect. And then over here on the blue channel, we have our AO. This is the ambient occlusion map. And this just makes it use a bit more shadows in some areas than others. So for example, underneath the boiler, there's more shadow as it goes down. Underneath these bars here, you can see there's a bit more shading going on behind them. And that is what the AO texture is for. So these three combined together, you've got your red channel, your green channel, your blue channel, those three combined together makes the MGA texture, which is, like I said, looks like a really frightening groovy image, which doesn't really look at all like our main texture, but that is how our PBR material works. So now that we know how the MGA texture works, we can also take a look now at our CDR, which works in exactly the same way. So the CDR texture looks like this at the moment for our 2P. A lot brighter and far more interesting than the MGA. But again, this is the red, green and blue channels in action. So if we split them up to RGB, this is what we see in the red, green and blue channels at the moment. Now, because if we have a look at trying to recolor our 2P at the moment, it doesn't do anything. That's because I currently have recoloring disabled on these liveries. I didn't actually make a recolor map. So if you have a look on the red channel, that's just completely white, which shows that everything on this texture doesn't get recolored at all. What we could do is, let's say we copy this and just paste it on top. If we wanted the, let's say this boiler area here. If we selected this area of the boiler, but not the stripe, so yeah, let's select this area of the boiler, and then on the red channel we painted that black. And if we recombine these again, as you can see, the red channel has had an effect up there from where it was before. If we saved that and overwrote our old CDR, which is there. If we overwrote that, now if we go back to Model Viewer again, because of the change that we just did on our MGA, if we try to recolor a bit, now that bit of the boiler recolors. And that is how you do a a recolor map. It's on the red channel of the CDR texture. So the other two parts of the CDR is the green and the blue. The green is the dirt and the blue is the rust. Now I literally generated these two maps from Substance Painter. So if we have a look on here, this is where we got all the metallic effects and things like that earlier on as well for the MGA. But also if we have a look on this, if we go to the body, you can see I've generated a couple of dirt and rust maps on here as well. Literally just using Substance Painter's dirt and rust generators. Well, metal edge generator for the rust. And what I then did was exported this mask to a file. So if we have a look back in our 3D Works earlier on, where did I put them? Right, so yeah, when I exported those two channels, no, that wasn't it. Yeah, that was it. So there we go. So that was literally a channel exported right out of Substance Painter. What I did then was just tweaked the brightness of them a little bit, just to get a nice effect in the game. But with these two combined together, when we have a look in Model Viewer again, as the train gets older, we start getting these really nice little aging effects. And again, earlier on I was talking about in the material file that we've got our CDR there, but we also use the game's own dirt and rust textures. So what this is doing is it's literally giving us a mask upon which the game applies the dirt and rust. And so the brighter that is, the more powerful the effect is, shall we say. And yeah, just tweaking the green and blue channels here, we get these really, really nice aging effects in the game as the model viewer applies the dirt and rust textures on top of our main locomotive texture. And that is what the CDR texture does. And I believe we are coming towards the end of the tutorial, because I have already explained now how each of the different model files work, the mesh files, the mesh blobs, how to export, what the different textures do. So the last thing that we want to do before we are ready to test and release our mod is we want to make some in-game GUI icons. And literally the way how we do that is we just load up our model into Model Viewer like so, and just press the screenshot button. Now if you have the vehicle stage mod installed, clicking this screenshot button automatically generates your GUI icons. So it takes a couple of moments, and as you can see in the Model Viewer's console, it's writing all of our images, and now it's done. So if we go back to Transport Fever, the Model Viewer's install folder, if you have a look in the screenshots file, GUI icons, res, textures, UI, you've got models 20 and models small, and inside each of these you've got vehicle train, and then there is the icon that it just generated for us. So we have a look at that in here. There's the small one, that's 100% size there. And if we go back up to model small, vehicle train, and there's the other icon for us. Like I said, because it's been generated by Model Viewer, it's got its alpha channel already. We literally don't need to do anything at all with it. We can just take it as it is. What I tend to do is just come down here, just cut the UI folder and paste it straight into our own mod folder. So if you have a look in textures, there's the UI, and in here are all of the icons that were generated for the different liveries. So we've got our Midland Rail livery, we've got our LMS livery with the second tender that I was talking about earlier on. We have our Somerset and Dorset livery, and there's also the BR livery. And like I said, you'll be loading these up, each one into Model Viewer, just clicking the screenshot button, letting it generate them. And then when it's done all of them, you simply copy and paste them right here into the UI folder. And that is literally all you need to do for the icons. Model Viewer does them all itself. It's really, really handy. Alternatively, if you fancy being a bit artsy about it, you can create your own icons. But again, this is where you put them into. You've got the smaller one in here for the smaller bits of the UI, and then you've got the larger ones for like the depot view and things like that. And last but not least, you have the mod Lua file up here, right next to your res folder. And all that it is literally just, well, it's literally just this. It tells the game what the mod is. So you've got your the name up here, a little description, and then for the purposes of uploading it to Steam, you've got your creator name up here and tags for which it can be found on Steam. Like I said, there's lots of little options here that you can pick from. And that just literally needs to be up at the top here with res. Now, image00.tga is literally just a preview image which appears when you're navigating through the different mods when you start the game. And that can just be literally the same as this. Just a screenshot with perhaps your name written on it and the title, and just a copy of that as TGA. So yeah, these three images are literally all the same, but you need this one for the workshop. This one had a purpose. I can't remember exactly what it was by now, but yeah, you literally need just three images that are exactly the same. Preview, workshop preview, and image00.tga. And then from there, it is literally ready to be uploaded to the workshop. So obviously, you've been testing it in Model Viewer, you've tested it in the game, you're happy with it, it's all working, it's all doing exactly what it should. So the next thing you want to do is put it into the staging area, ready to be uploaded to Steam. So the place where you want to go is your Steam install folder, if I can remember where I put that. So it's in the Steam install folder, user data, your user ID, 446,800, remote, oh no, sorry, local, and staging area. So in here we literally have a copy of the folder from our mods folder. So literally just want to copy that and put it into the staging area, and then when it is in there, once it's in the staging area, you want to load up Transport Fever. And when you load up Transport Fever, the first thing you'll see down here is Publish Mod. When you click on that, and then click on that one, it will give a quick check that the preview images are all there and that it's happy with all the items, and then you can right in here, for example, initial release, and then you just click the publish button, and then when you click that, it will upload to the workshop. Obviously I don't want to do this because I've already published this one, so we're just going to go back and exit. And then when it is finishing, when it's finished publishing, one last thing that you want to do is have a look in the folder in the staging area. It will generate a workshop file ID, and that is literally your ID number for your mod on the workshop. And you want to keep hold of this, so I highly recommend that you copy this file and bring it back to, copy that file and paste it here into your mods folder, so that if you do any updates and put this back into the staging area, when you load back into the game again, and it will say publish mod, but if the workshop file ID is present, it will update your mod rather than upload a new one. So you want to make sure that that is kept somewhere safe. And that is it, I believe. We've pretty much gone through how to publish your mod from your 3D modeling software right the way through to Transport Fever. I'm fairly sure there's a few things that I've forgotten. Well, I do apologise, but this is literally just a basic rundown of how to publish your mod and how to make a mod. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching all of this. I shall be uploading this to YouTube very shortly with all the links that we were talking about earlier on in the description. If you guys like my mods, then please do support me on Patreon. I'll give a shout out to the Patreon now. You can support me for as little as $1 per mod, and every little helps. At the moment we're at, I think it's like 20 patrons at the moment. We do have a goal to try and reach 50 patrons, and if we can get there, then I will make the British Rail Class 50 diesel locomotive. That is our first goal, and hopefully we'll get there before too long. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Cheerio.